You're listening to an episode recorded during the time Innovation Fuel was part of University Canada West. We are proud and grateful for the work we've done together, and we want to thank the university for being in our podcast. We are now excited to continue the journey of Innovation Fuel into its next chapter. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to Innovation Fuel, business podcast by University Canada West,
bringing you fantastic stories for accomplished entrepreneurs and key industry professionals. Let's explore the entrepreneurial world through local businesses and our university community.
Hello, Dave. How are you today?
Good, and you?
Perfect. My daughter loves that I read a story for her, a book for her, or just telling a story. How about you? How about your daughters?
My kids totally love stories, but what's interesting, Gelareh, actually, storytelling is extremely important, and I don't think we realize how important it is, because I actually had a whole series of startup entrepreneurs trying to get their idea across to encourage mentors to actually mentor them. And what I was trying to tell them is that they need to articulate their story in order to create value for the person you want them to do something for you. You need to be able to showcase that story in a way that they feel that, hey, that's got value for me. I want to participate in that story.
I think we have a guest today that he lives a very different lives. So I think that we have a lot of good stories to tell us about how he's mentoring entrepreneurs. Let's welcome Christian Ray Flores, co-founder of Third Drive, to another episode of Innovation Fuel. Welcome, Dave. Welcome, Christian.
Yes, welcome to Innovation Fuel, brought to you by University Canada West. We are jumping across the 50th parallel, and we're heading down to Texas, of all places, to visit our friend Christian. Christian, we're so excited to learn about Third Drive and what you're doing there. But first, we need to know, who is Christian? Tell us a little bit about Christian.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate it. And it's very hard to say because I'm a confused person, I would say. I sort of grew up all over the world. I was a half Russian, half Chilean. We went from Russia to Chile to Germany to Russia to Africa and back, so it's just a very strange childhood that's full of new beginnings. Let's put it that way. That's a positive spin, but it was really ignited by a civil unrest in Chile. I was 5 years old and I was in a refugee camp. That was my first childhood memory. So, when you start that way, it makes you a very strange person long-term, I think. But the journey basically takes me back to Russia. I had a sort of a strange mix of a master's degree in economics, knowing 4 languages by age 9, and then starting a music career of all things, So I was a very successful, one of the top pop artists in Russia for about a decade. And I sort of veered towards media, philanthropy, startups, coaching, performance coaching. So that's basically a quick and very confusing overview of who I am. And I'm not sure I gave you more clarity or confused you even more.
Well, I don't think we've ever had a pop star on the show, so you're a first. And I got to say, I like the word unique and special versus that other element that you used. I think you have a unique background and a very special background. But let's jump over, Christian. Let's jump over to, yes, fast forward from pop music and into this world of entrepreneurship. You storm into entrepreneurship. You were inspired to launch Third Drive.
That's right.
What is Third Drive, and what are you trying to accomplish there?
One of the most underrated characteristics of people that end up inspiring us, right, being role models or inspirations for us, is that they all have this like a squiggly line of an evolution. Almost no one starts, the stereotypical startup that starts in a dorm room, by a Zuckerberg type. Almost never happens, actually. Most successful entrepreneurs are first successful after 3-4 failures and in their 40s. That's the reality of things. So we should talk about that more and less about, the social network. It's just not the journey of most people, So to me, before I started Third Drive, I had a music career. I started 2 nonprofits, 3 companies, had, production company in Los Angeles. We're doing music videos and music production, high-end music production with like an international crew, and for Eastern European artists, which was very niche sort of type stuff. And then that evolved into Third Drive because I realized that music is a very unstable, sort of, you know, bipolar, I would say, market. And I wanted to do broader stuff for businesses in general. So we started with video, and then we went with branding, with strategy, web, basically brands development was the thing that we did. And we did it with first just small businesses. Then I partnered up with my buddy Brandon Nicely, who was a tech investor, tech entrepreneur, built $1 billion company in New York and in the 90s, did some other really cool stuff, raised a bunch of money in Silicon Valley. So he had this whole slew of things that I wanted to learn. And he wanted my expertise in storytelling. And basically what he said is like, look, all these people that I'm working with, all these startup founders, most of them are engineers. Most of them don't know how to tell a story. And you do. So can we partner up? So basically that's how Third Drive was born, in sort of this current setting where we mix essentially consulting, guidance, coaching, and digital media. So does that make sense?
Oh, it totally doesn't. But there is something a little bit different about your Christian, because we typically think of marketing agencies in this element where they're doing all these things, where they're doing brand strategy, they're doing marketing and advertising, they're doing creative
Mm-hmm.
direction, they're doing all these pieces. But you guys bring a different flair to it. You are solely getting involved in the investment and the
Yeah.
direction and helping them scope and vision this.
Yeah, we do. And what the reason we do that is because we realize that there's being a startup founder is a terrible, it's like being an artist. Like, your chances of success are quite literally statistically, what, 5 to 10% at the very best, right? So when somebody is brilliant, has a great idea, and we see a future there, we usually sort of try to create some support around it. So it's almost like it's not really an accelerator type thing, because an accelerator type thing is they throw you into a jungle and whoever survives, right? With a bunch of other people who may or may not help you. We sort of take a little bit more of a boutique approach where we go, okay, we like you. Here's what we can do. Here's what we won't do. And then we start sort of seeing if we can find other resources around us, people with money. We help them pitch. We help them understand what investors want. We create a story. We become vested as well. And it's sort of this sort of almost like a new one, almost like you treat it as a garden, okay, not as a factory. And we just like doing that, basically. And it's not really the only model, but it's a good model for us, I think, because the traditional ecosystems that are supposed to help um, people who are doing startups, they really are more factories than gardens. And some things flourish in factories. I would say most founders won't flourish in a factory. They need to be nurtured.
Yeah, that was very good. So I just want to know that how the Third Drive developed its unique approach combining storytelling with business growth.
Well, I think it's really a combination of the co-founders, right? So I'm the storyteller, and I'm a good coach. So one of the things that I do outside of Third Drive is performance coaching for entrepreneurs and business people. I'm a really good coach. I'm like a people whisperer, right? And I think part of it has to do with just growing up all over the world and learning sort of what it takes to help somebody flourish. Which ironically is the thing that I did for my partner, Brandon. The first thing I did for him is sort of coach him personally. And he was like, I really like this. And then he also found out about the storytelling piece. And then for me, from what I liked in him is that I was very excited about learning about tech and about tech startups. And I had no in. I didn't know the context and nuance. And he did. He's been in the space for decades. So it became this very synergistic partnership where I was just sitting in rooms here, listening to him talk to founders, to investors, and I was learning from him, and he was learning from me, basically. So it was shaped really out of just two journeys, two people with some expertise.
I need you walk me through your storytelling and how you're doing and how you're supporting co-founders or investors.
Oh, well, that is a long conversation, but I can give you some highlights, right? So, for example, one of the things that we noticed, that we see all the time, is that people that have tech startups, they understand that they're solving a problem, but they're so hyper focused, they're so close to the product that they hyper focus when they tell the story on their passion, right? Oh, I like this because of that. And actually, people don't care. Specifically investors, they just don't care about your story. So you're telling the wrong story. They sometimes they talk about the story of the product. So they hyper focus on functionality and the cool things, the cool widgets, and the all the stuff that the thing does, whatever it is that the thing does. But that's not the story either. And then what we teach them is to focus on the customer and what's their story, what makes them hunger and thirst for this thing that they have, that they don't even know exists yet. So that's one piece, right? How do you focus on the customer? How do you tell that story from their standpoint? And then what are the things that you say no to in the story, right? But then when they pitch to it, so okay, so they get there. I think a lot of them get there eventually, and they're engineers, remember, right? So they're very, very technical, and technical things don't translate into story very well. But then if they're talking to investors, they forget to switch the story, because the story needs to be the story of the investor. So the investor's sitting there and they're polite usually, and they'll nod and they'll say something encouraging. And in their minds, they're going, how quickly can I get out of this room? Because you lost me on minute 3 or something like that, you know? So you lost me when you said something that's to me a red flag. It tells me you will not succeed, because they've done, especially venture capital people, right? I mean, they do hundreds of deals. So if you say, I'm going to disrupt the multi-billion-dollar industry, that's it. You're done, because everybody says that, right? uh, or they say, I'm the next this and this. That's it. You're done. But what you're not saying is, you, the investor, are looking to catch the next wave of where the world is going. And with me, you're going to catch the wave. And I can show you, first of all, that this is happening with or without you. And what you want is to catch the wave, because I know I'm riding this wave. Now you're talking the story of the investor, and you're motivating them to lean in and say, oh, so what's this wave? How can you show that to me? And you can say, yeah, this is it. Like, these are some numbers, these are some facts, something very clear that they already know, but they haven't put 2 and 2 together. So you're not inventing something, you're creating a story that points them to something very obvious. And they say, you see this wave? And they have to be able to say in like 30 seconds, I totally know this wave. And then you have to say, this is how we're going to ride it together. So that now you got somebody's attention, for example. And then you need to think with compassion towards the investor. And that's something that people just don't feel. They don't feel compassion towards the investor or empathy. So the investor is a human being. So if the investors that are your tone, your posture, the way you speak is give me your money, that is not attractive to an investor, because they're human beings. You know, you want to include the investor and walk across the table and show them, hey, let me show you this one case study, and just point here, even if it's a prototype, but it works. Let them play with your thing. See that these are all tiny little things that you can do that tell the story to the investor, and the investor feels like you care about them. You are trying to solve their problem. You're trying to de-risk their risk, and and you respect them enough to want to get them excited about your thing, right? And believe it or not, the body language of a founder who basically looks at an investor as just a bank account will give that away. And then you've lost them, because you don't care about them, and they're humans too.
But I love what you're saying, Steve, Christian, because again, coming back to the first thing you set up is like, it's keep it simple, keep it stupid. Because if they don't understand the concept, you lost them. But I also love what you're saying because when you're talking about your story, you got to relate your story to the individual that you want
Yeah,
to be a
yeah,
part of that story. You need those characters to play in your story, and how are you going to get them involved in
yeah.
your story? Well, you got to create value for them.
So there's so much that goes into that, and I think founders are so close to the product and they're so enamored with their baby that all they do is talk about the baby, and they should be talking about the person hearing the story about the baby, why they should care
Okay.
about the baby.
So, but what I've read about your website, I mean, it's, you're focusing both business growth and social impact. That is not difficult to balance, find a balance between them when you're coaching and find helping to the founders.
I don't think there's any difference whatsoever in the sense that, especially if we're talking about startup social, sort of social impact startups, it's all entrepreneurship. One is straight up entrepreneurship, and the other one's social entrepreneurship. So fundamentally, there is no difference. Actually, even the business model is different, but the fundamentals of it being an entrepreneurial endeavor, they're really the same. The parallels are really amazing, actually. As a matter of fact, social and nonprofit leaders should learn entrepreneurship, because for the same exact reason why startup leaders should learn how to empathize with investors, because social entrepreneurs also don't empathize with donors. They just treat them as sources of money. Give me the grant, and I'll stop communicating with you, for example. Which is what happens all the time. I'm not going to report back. I'm not going to tell you stories about what your money did for the people that I'm helping. I'm just going to get your check, and you're going to forget, and then you will not even see me for a year until I come back asking for more money, right? So a lot of those strategies and mindsets are incredibly um, parallel, essentially, right?
So looking on this side, so how do you see the intersection of technology and business evolving in the next evolution of business as we move forward? You talked about storytelling, talked about Canadian creating that value. How do we mastermind that element with that technology and business evolving?
I'm not sure I understand the question, or maybe I don't know the answer.
But even like when you, because you said you have a co-founder that's in the tech world, so
Yeah,
the value that you both bring and the synergy of storytelling and
yeah.
technology, how do they sync together? How do they help these businesses reach their potential?
Well, I'll give you an example of a company that are we have a position in the company, and it's called WaviMed, right? And it's basically this brain assessment system, and you can focus on the functionality, the type of, for example, you can predict Alzheimer's, you can predict when to come back to a game if somebody was concussed, how the importance of having a baseline brain scan for every high school student, because then if they're concussed, if they fall, they can compare their new brain scan with the baseline base scan and know when they're ready to play again. While currently, the way you determine that is to do this, follow my finger, like it's just so subjective. It's not data driven, and we're talking about your brain, right? So all these dimensions, you can talk about predicting sort of ADHD, measuring that with through brain scans, et cetera, et cetera. So you can talk about the technical stuff that is really important to some people who want, for example, big data, right? But the storytelling is it's essentially the vehicle for them to understand. So if you throw a bunch of terms of frequencies and all that stuff, and you don't tell the story of how much would a how much would a parent pay, how much would the doctor benefit from offering a service where they know their child's normal brain activity, so that they can know when to pull them, when to allow them to go back to school. To if you don't tell the story of the horrific injuries when people persist in, let's say, American football, right? And the the horrible, debilitating consequences for a young man who's in his or her prime, if they don't know the data, you know, um, how the military can measure the state of the sort of the PTSD levels, for example, of somebody who was in battle, and if they're ready to go return to battle, and what are the risks of that. So if you don't tell specific individual stories of those things from the point of view of the young person, or the point of view of a doctor, or point of view of a parent, none of that lands well. It's just numbers, and people are done. We are wired to process truth, even very detailed truth, through stories. And I don't know if that answers your question, but I feel like that's sort of a big deal.
Well, no, again, it does because it leads me down another path, Christian. I think and like we're seeing this evolution of storytelling, like we talked about, but we now see this evolution of storytelling not only from the actual perspective of the product or service that you're offering, but the individuals are now going to the founders and trying to say, are they really part of this story? And the branding, the personal branding of the individual, the founders are actually driving these ideas.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I mean, a personal brand is sort of the future, I think, because we've evolved to not follow organizations, but to follow people. We identify with people, right? So for example, when I talk about my performance coaching, I can talk about sort of the tendencies, the trends, the data, the problems people have. But if I don't tell the story about being a refugee at age 5, seeing civil war in Africa at age 10, seeing the fall of the Soviet Union at age 18 or 17, having my parents divorce, having all kinds of insecurities about being biracial in a not in a monoracial country, moving to America, which is super, I would say, intimidating for someone, because America is sort of held at this high pedestal, at least perception wise, and knowing, okay, am I going to do okay here? How do I overcome that? How do I overcome fear, insecurity, low self-esteem? If I don't tell those stories, I can give you the same exact facts, but they won't really lean in and say, "Oh, you know what it feels like."
No, it's in an AI world, my friend, and we have this element of artificial intelligence and fast robotics, and these elements is like, how do we find the pivotal element of this? And I think that's where people are struggling. Is
Yeah.
this real or not?
Oh, well, I think so. Yeah, and I think that's why when people fear sort of the advance of AI, um, I think you should fear it if you're doing work that can easily be commoditized, right? I mean, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be replaced by AI, and we're talking about what maybe a decade ago it would be inconceivable, sort of high qualification stuff, maybe some of a big slice of legal work, for example, contracts, all kinds of things like that, even medical things that were irreplaceable. So I would say what that to your students, if you can be easily commoditized, you will absolutely be replaced. You should definitely be worried about AI. But what you do is actually elevate the kind of work you do to be uniquely human, uniquely yours, and irreplaceable. Then you have nothing to worry about, because AI is going to just accelerate and amplify that. And actually, you will be in higher demand because there's only one of you. No one can compete with you in being you. And if you create so much value that stems from your unique wisdom and perspective, no AI can replace that. AI can bring a lot of knowledge into somebody's sort of sphere of influence, but AI cannot bring wisdom. So that's sort of the next frontier. It sort of elevates our ability to serve at a higher level, and then don't do the menial stuff that we actually hate doing in the first place. So
I love it, my friend. I love it. This has been amazing discussion, and I love that you're bringing in storytelling, and we're talking about keeping it simple, keeping it simple when we're trying to prevent that value across. Before we wrap up today, Christian, we need to come up with some kind of a problem. I mean, a challenge. Sorry, to our audience out there, a micro challenge, something that maybe you're thinking of and a small element maybe for third drive that you might want the students to engage with and give you some feedback on. Or maybe it's a macro challenge out there that we need to be talking about. Maybe this AI and storytelling, how they deflect on each other.
Mm-hmm. Do you mean a challenge individually for the people that are listening?
Yeah,
right?
challenge for the individuals that are listening, my friend. Let's keep them engaged.
Okay, so what I would say is this. The next time you have an uninterrupted time where you have a piece of paper or journal or your laptop or whatever, create a timeline of your life and note the things, the conversations, events, things that happened, people you interacted with, where you felt the most fully alive. And if you create a sort of a timeline like that, then the next step is create some sort of mosaic, some picture, some composite picture of what that says about who you are, your giftedness, your passion, your inclination, almost like your brilliance that is perhaps lost oftentimes in a world where you want certainty and there's big corporations and larger sort of organizations, and you want the certainty of a steady paycheck. And what that does is also encourages you to compromise and become more of a cog in a machine, right? And what I'm trying to challenge you with is find how you personally, why are you walking this earth? What do you have to contribute to humanity? And the answer is almost always in the things that are not noticed, that no one will measure or quantify for you. You'll have to do it for yourself.
Thank you very much, Christian. Thank you, Dave. That was another episode of Innovation Fuel.
Thank you for listening to Innovation Fuel. We are on all podcast streaming platforms, Google, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.
Visit our website at www.upenwest.ca/Innovation Fuel. Also, follow us on Instagram at innovation_fuel.